Hello, welcome back to Being Black with Camille Smith. Today we are welcoming N'Dea Irvin-Choy. N'Dea is actually a PhD candidate at the University of Delaware studying biomedical engineering. While she's not conducting her research on treating bacterial vaginosis during pregnancy, she creates content for first-generation and minority students attending and navigating STEM graduate school or programs. And in her spare time, she loves going to the beach because she is a Jersey girl and doing yoga, playing sports, and reading. I'm super excited to talk to her because she actually reached out to me on my Instagram after seeing something that I posted about my YouTube channel, my podcast. And ideally, this is kind of what I want to happen. I want to be able to have conversations with people that I don't necessarily know immediately or I knew through school and, highlight their stories. So I'm super excited to have N'Dea on. And without further ado, N'Dea, what does being Black mean to you?
So first, I am so excited to be here. Thanks for having me. But I kind of struggle with this question. So being Black to me means being your unapologetic self in all forms and everywhere you go. It's especially finding joy in the things that in dark times, we have a great way of doing that. And then also just being creative with whatever circumstances that you're given. I feel like we can make so much out of nothing. And although that's, not a great thing to brag about, it is something to be proud of. And that's really like what I relate to is my Blackness.
And then do you actually have a concrete memory, like the first time that you found out that you were Black?
I can't remember the first time when I realized I was Black, but I do remember when I realized that I was a minority. So when I was in elementary school, I tested into this like specialized program in my township, and it was called Gifted and Talented, and it was basically like an honors program for elementary kids. So I was in that program, and I would be like in a normal classroom with everyone, and at a certain time of day, I would leave that classroom and go with other students to another classroom. We would learn like different books. We had like math classes, and we did just a completely different curriculum than the other students. And I remember one of my friends, she wasn't in the GT program, but she was still my friend, like in, the regular classes. And one time I was at her house and she told her mom, like, I want to be in the classroom with the white kids. And I knew I wasn't white. So I was like, well, why am I in that classroom? And it like made me kind of like think like there are mostly white people in that classroom. And white kids, and that there weren't a lot of students that looked like me in that classroom. So I think that was the first moment that I realized that I was different and that I was in that like minority category.
Mm-hmm. And then how was it growing up in your area?
Yeah, so my hometown is actually majority Hispanic and Latino. I actually looked at the statistics earlier. So we were a majority, like 45% Hispanic, and then like 30% Black, and then like 10% white, and the rest other, which is like so unheard of. I mean, like compared to where I am now. So my friend group growing up was so diverse. We would bring like our cultural foods to lunch, to like different events, to like pasta parties for like sports games and stuff, and just like swap foods. And it was so great. And that was like my favorite part. I loved Hispanic Heritage Month. Like that's my favorite month. But growing up, like had such a diverse group of friends. And then when I got to college, it was less diverse, but I still had a friend group, like a Black community. So I was the only Black person in my undergrad, but in my major, and I was one of two Black girls on my field hockey team. I played collegiate field hockey. But I made friends with other athletes, a lot of who were Black. So I still had that community where I had a diverse group of friends. And then now that I'm in grad school, I am like the only Black person that I see sometimes. And it's completely different. I even looked up the demographics for my school now, and it's 75% white, which is a huge difference compared to the 10% white that I grew up with. So it's kind of like a culture shock. And not kind of, it was a culture shock when I did go into grad school and going into some of the rooms that I enter now.
And then do you have any advice for your younger self?
Oh gosh. I would tell my younger myself to stop trying to fit in. Being different is a flex. And I feel like, everyone goes through that phase where they like want to be like their friends. They want to do what's cool. And I tried that for so long. It was so painful. But I mean, now I'm so happy that I stopped doing that. And I'm just being who I am and enjoying it. So yeah.
Definitely relate to that. I feel like I've definitely touched on that, and other guests have touched on that. Being different is a blessing. Um, so I'm really happy that that was your advice to yourself. That's it. That's our advice to everybody.
Yes.
So I'm super excited to talk to you because, as people that are watching know, I'm a chemical engineer. So to see another Black woman being a PhD candidate was so cool. That's really the only way that I could describe it. So today we're going to be talking about being Black in engineering. And again, I love these conversations because I feel like when I went to undergrad, I graduated in May, there were 4 of us in the chemical engineering program. And
that just like in your class or like in
there was, well, if we gonna talk about that. So in my, there was 4 people, 2 girls, myself included, and 2 guys. And then the year below us, there's only 1 Black girl. And I stay in contact with her now because like before, like she would come to the library, like talk to us, like it was like cool, but like now she's kind of by herself, navigating everything. So I still talk to her, and I actually hope to talk to her on this show eventually. But to see you was just really cool because I think something that kind of propelled me through my journey was like, all right, like I don't have representation, so I'm going to try and be that representation for someone behind me. So then to meet someone that is a PhD candidate and is a Black woman is like, what? This is so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just
It's so crazy. I mean, I can feel for the woman that you're talking about, because that was me. Like all of college, I was the only Black student, including faculty. I didn't know many people younger than me, but at the time that I was going through my program, I only knew one other Black student in just like the engineering school, and he was a guy, and he was a Mechie. And we had very few in common. Like we didn't like study together, we weren't taking the same classes, but just like to see at least one other person in the entire building was like, okay, like I got somebody, just like someone to actually talk to. But I mean, that's exactly why I like started my platform, because I wasn't seeing anyone in undergrad. I don't really see anyone in grad school, but it wasn't until I started Instagram that I started to like actually meet other Black women in STEM, which is such a liberating experience. Like it is, to just like find a community and have a community somewhere is so much better than not having a community at all.
Yeah, and I'm just recently tapping into the woman in engineering community. I think we actually both follow, like, there's like multiple different, like larger platforms for women in engineering, but there's one like Women Who Engineer, and then there's like Engineering Gals, and like just seeing it, like seeing people post about it, seeing like content creators like yourself, like just posting about like things that I really relate to was just, again, a very cool thing. And being able to now find more Black women that are in engineering, even though they might be the only person in their class now, like kind of tapping into that community is really cool. So like, how do you think being Black has affected your engineering journey?
Oh yeah. I think it has affected throughout, but just like in hindsight, I think it mostly affected it in a transition from college to grad school, but also a little bit throughout college too. So like I said, I was the only Black person, but I didn't have the same just like exposure to engineering in high school as some of my like classmates had. So that kind of like set me back a little bit. I didn't really have a community to like fall back on. My community was my field hockey team and my teammates. And at the time, no one was an engineer. So it was just like, my friends are just like, telling me, you got this, you can do this, which is great. But, like you kind of want someone in your major to like be going with you through it. And then I think from being the only Black person and being a first generation student and being a collegiate athlete, there was just so much pressure from all ends to not be lazy, not be dumb, not be like the angry Black woman. Like every day there was something new and like a new challenge. But I think when I transferred, or I guess transitioned from college to graduate school itself is just an isolating environment. Like the process isn't quite the same as college. So went from being around my roommates all the time to like, being by myself and, running my own research and things like that, but also not really having a community, like I said, to kind of fall back on and just like relax with and talk about things like other than science, just like the social interactions that like get you through the day. There was very little of that early on. And it definitely affected me. One point, there have been several times where I've considered like, should I continue here? And I think so many Black students especially go through that, where they're like, is this really right for me? If I don't have a community, I'm probably not doing like all that well, or the transition is hard. The content or the curriculum is hard. So like, should I really stay through this? So I think it's affected me in more ways than I can really lay out, but has also made me so resilient in that like I went through this process pretty much alone. Like, I mean, I had my village. I had people behind me the whole way, and you really do need a village for this. But to not like have there wasn't anyone else in my class that was Black, right? So it was just like, I have to figure out all these things, and then, I have to go back and explain it to my family and like why I want to do this and how this is going to help my career and like all of those things. And just to have someone to like relate to would have definitely helped. But now with my platform, I really, like you said, am trying to be the representation that I didn't have, and to be the role model that I didn't have, growing up.
And I think it's really important that you mentioned like grad school is very isolating. And of course, like I personally haven't gone through it, but I think at least going through undergrad, like I feel like grad programs and getting your PhD is like almost like very romanticized. It's like, yeah, like this is like the next level, like this is what you do. Like if you're a PhD, even if like you're like a PE, like that's like what you need to do and like da da da. But like they never talk about how like it takes a lot of sacrifice and a lot of time, to do those things, even like going through the application process, which hopefully I can ask you a little bit about that too. Like going through the application process, having to study, having to do your research. And like even like I considered, and I'm still considering going to grad school, but like missing out potentially on like life events because you have to study or like you have to do certain things. Like those are things that people don't really talk to you about. That's why for any student, but specifically Black students, if you don't have, that representation within your class, or if you don't have a community to fall back on, it's very easy to be like, yeah, like, is this for me? Even going through undergrad, I thought about like why am I doing this? Like, I'm constantly stressed out all the time. You also mentioned too, like I didn't have a single Black professor, not even just in the engineering school, but like in like at all, not once, none. Not once.
I had a chemistry professor, so organic chem.
Really? That's kind of cool.
Yeah. That's why I picked her, to be honest. So yeah.
But like no, not even again, just Black. And I think it's also unfortunate that like going through undergrad, it was like, I just want a person of color. Like they don't even have to be a Black person. I just want somebody, I want somebody to look at them like, oh, they don't look like me, but they kind of do. I don't know. Like I didn't have that either. So I think it's really easy for Black students to kind of look around and be like, okay, like you either have to really double down and like get through those lonely periods of time by yourself, which is not easy at all. Or you do think about changing your major, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I have friends that did both of those things, that chose like, hey, like this isn't for me, like my teachers don't really support me. I want to try and do something else that is, better for me or like taps into my interests more. And I kind of stayed and was like, oh, well, like, I don't want to give up, but this is the worst.
Yeah. You kind of give yourself like this ultimatum, like, oh, well, if I do this, or I guess not really an ultimatum, but more of like, put this pressure on yourself. Like, if I don't do this, I'm failing,
Yes.
my family or my community or my hometown or the people coming after me. But it's also like, I am hurting myself sometimes by being here. Like, some of the pressure that I'm putting on myself is not helpful at all. So, and I think that's where a community like kind of introduces that like level-headedness to be like, you can do this. Okay. People have done this before. You are going to do it too. And it's going to be okay. Like, you just need that like outside like influence to be like, it's just take a breath.
Yeah.
It'll be okay. But no, I definitely felt that. It's so sad that it's so common. It really is.
And I talk about her, but like Maya was again the only other Black girl in my class, and like the amount of conversations that we've had, like, oh, like, all right, well, I can't drop out because if I drop out, then like Maya's gonna be by herself, and like vice versa. Oh, like if I drop out, Camille's gonna be by herself. Like, okay, so we can't drop out. Like, we can't drop out. We have to keep going. Or in a more positive way, like, okay, like if Maya's gonna do this, like I'm gonna do it too, and vice versa, and like trying to lean on one another. But everybody doesn't have that, at least one person to kind of like bounce back and forth on and like lean on. So I really appreciate you mentioning that, because I do think it's really important for Black students that are considering engineering to know. But I do really want to ask about the application process. Like, how was the application process different from applying to undergrad versus applying to graduate school?
Yeah. So I think the main difference is that you're applying for an advisor or like a project or like an interest, right? So in undergrad, you're like, I want to do this major. And they give you the curriculum and all the classes, and they're like, all right, if you can handle these classes, then you can be in the major. But in grad school, it's like, I have this past experience, but I want to start to explore this like research focus. So that could be, orthopedics or drug delivery or devices or something. And instead of looking at the title of the program, you're instead looking at the advisor and what kind of projects they run and what are their research interests. So it's a different way to find your program. And I think a lot of people get caught off guard with that, because if you were, let's say you're interested in like cancer research, that could fall under a biology program. It could fall under biomedical engineering. It could fall under chemical engineering. So you really have to look for, what are you interested in and what do you want to get out of grad school? Like, what do you want your skills to be used for, by the time you're done?
So then how did you go about finding your current advisor?
Yeah, so it's a funny story. I didn't know my school actually existed when I was applying for grad school. I originally wanted to do drug delivery for cancer research, cancer applications. And the reason why I told myself I need to apply to grad school or go to grad school is because I didn't think I had enough experience, which it's kind of ridiculous now that I think about it, but I did my undergrad research in like orthopedics, and I really wanted to get into the drug delivery field, but I didn't feel like I was, well equipped for it because I didn't have any research experience in drug delivery. So I was like, why do I go do a master's program somewhere for 2 years? So I told my advisor this. I was like, I want to apply for all these programs, and I like did my research on just basically cancer drug delivery was like the keywords that I used, which could be anything. But I decided on schools from that point. And she was actually the one who told me, like, you have to pay for a master's program, but you don't have to pay for a PhD program. And I was like, okay. And she was like, so they will cover your tuition and give you a stipend if you just apply for the PhD program instead. And I was like, oh, but what if I don't want to get a PhD? And she's like, well, you can just leave with your master's. And I was like, right. So I changed all of my applications after that point to PhD programs. I sent out my applications my senior year, my fall of senior year, which, by the way, I didn't even decide I wanted to go to grad school until the summer before my senior year, which is very late compared to most people that are actually in grad school.
Mhm.
It was kind of like a hasty last minute decision, but I pulled it together the summer before senior year, completed my application, sent them out. And then I went to a conference. It was a CMBE, Cellular Molecular Bioengineering Conference, over winter break. And I was presenting my research. I was apparently the only undergrad there, which I didn't know. I didn't know until the end of the conference, but I very quickly realized that I needed to put myself out there to make this conference worthwhile, right? So I didn't know anyone. I didn't know the field. Again, I'm an undergrad. I went to the conference and I was eating lunch with who is now my department head. I just made conversation with her and I was like, hey, I'm N'Dea. I'm an undergrad and I'm looking for graduate school. And I was just like curious what you think, grad schools look for, when they're going through their applications. So we started talking and she was like, what are your interests, like your research interests? And I was like, drug delivery, but more specifically for breast cancer. And I remember her eyes like lit up and she was like, really? And I was like, yeah. And she was like, well, my department has a lab that studies that. And I was like, okay. And she's like, yeah, and the advisor is here. So if you want to come to dinner tonight, you can meet everyone. And I was like, okay, yeah, I'll go to dinner. Mind you, it was a gala, which I've never been to. So I was like really nervous, but I was like, I'm just gonna go and see what happens. So I went to the dinner. I met a bunch of other graduate students and they also like gave me advice on like what to look for in a lab and, like types of questions you should ask when you're visiting and like different things that, I should like know and pay attention to in the next couple months. And at the end of the dinner, I was like, it's now or never. You're either going to talk to them or you're not. So I went up to the department head and, talked to her and she introduced me to who are now my advisors. I have two advisors. And they talked to me and they were like, you should think about, you should send your application to us. The deadline has passed, but we'll accept your application and just come visit our school and see if you like it. And I was like, well, okay, I'm not doing anything else. Like, so it was really like a chance, like encounter, right? But once I actually visited the school, it was my first visit. Out of all the other visits that I went to. And I didn't know what to expect, but it was very welcoming and everyone was nice and like casual and just like open because I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do for research, but they were like, we have different, research projects that you could work on and kind of like, feel out. And then every school I went to after that didn't really match up to UD. So at that point I was like, okay, I'm gonna heavily consider University of Delaware. So yeah, my process is very abstract, I think, compared to most people, especially since I didn't really do my research that early. I didn't really do my research at all to really end up at the school that I am at now. But that doesn't mean that you can't just, on a whim decide I want to go to grad school because it happens to, even though it's rare, it still does happen and it happened to me.
That's such a cool story.
Thanks.
Anything can happen, everyone. Anything can happen. That's just cool. I feel like, now granted, my story is not nearly as cool, but even with Villanova, I live an hour away from the school, but like growing up, I knew I had a dream school. It's still my dream school. I really want to go to University of Pennsylvania. Now it would have to be for like my graduate degree. But yeah, I really wanted to go to Penn and like that was kind of it. Like I didn't really like look into other schools. And it wasn't until like a friend of a friend texted me my senior year. I think I was already because I applied regular everywhere, senior year of college, and was like, hey, like there's like a presidential scholar program. Like I think like you'd be a really good applicant for it. And I was like, oh, okay, like what school? And like they said Villanova, and I was like, okay, like what does that mean? Because like I went to public school my whole life, so like a lot of other people here, it's like, oh, like Catholic private school, like, ooh, like that's awesome. But like to me, I was like, what do they do?
What's the big deal?
So I like researched it, and then the presidential scholarship was like full tuition, full room and board. Like they basically paid you to go there. So I was like, oh yeah, cool. Like, I'll apply, like whatever. So I sent in my application. I ended up getting to the second round, and I ended up not getting it. And I was like, oh, okay. Like I didn't know what Villanova was before, so that's fine. And then I ended up getting accepted, and like got my financial aid package and like the merit package. And then I was like, oh, wait a second, maybe I should consider going here. And I didn't even visit. Like my first day of school, my first day going there was the first day of school, like move in. And I was like, well, like they're paying me, so I'm gonna love it.
I'm gonna figure it out.
And met really good people. But I do think it's cool to have like not random experiences, but like I don't know, things do work out sometimes. You don't necessarily have to plan everything. But of course, you had to be a good student before that to like be set up to
Right.
There's a little bit of planning, but like it's still, that's cool.
One of the things too that was different about my application is that I didn't have as much research experience as like most graduate students. Mm-hmm. So I started doing research when I was a junior, which a lot of people that I know that are in graduate school now started when they were freshmen. So, they had like the REU or like the research opportunities and internships. And I had internships, but I didn't have it in just research at all, really. So I think that's another thing that people kind of get set back by is that like, oh, I don't have enough research experience. Like, no, you can find a place that will accept you. Your skills are still applicable to, other like so many programs and schools. So that I think that was another thing that's kind of like lucky. Like, you've only been doing research for a year. How did you get into grad school? Like, well, I really maximized that conference interaction and like all my poster presentations and try to make the most out of those, the ones that I did have. So,
yeah, I definitely don't think when I was going through undergrad, like I also had internships, but I was really interested in research. I love being in lab. And I've always been like a very hands-on learner. So like everyone hates like chem lab and orgo lab. Like that was when I actually learned what we were talking about. But a lot of those research internships, like they don't pay you or they have like a one-time stipend. So I feel like that can also be, at least for me personally, like that was kind of a deterrent for me because I had to work during the summers to pay for books or like pay for certain things in my household, like things like that. So I feel like that can be kind of a deterrent. But like you said, you don't necessarily need to have a research internship every single summer for like your plans to work out. So do you have any advice for Black women specifically that are considering doing engineering or considering, doing grad school?
I would advise Black women to find a community if they are interested in Black engineers or becoming an engineer or just in graduate school. Like you need to find a community, and that should be your first priority, right? So everyone's like, oh, I need to learn the science, I need to learn the skills, I need to learn the techniques. You need to find a place that you can thrive and people that you can thrive with, and community is so important for that. Because I didn't really start to do that until I got comfortable, quote unquote, with the science. And by that point, I felt like there was like no hope because I'm like, I'm already so deep into this research that if I can't find people to like, hang out with or something, then it's not going to be worthwhile. So I would definitely invite you to do that. And there are so many, even like on the online community, there are so many organizations and groups that are built to facilitate those connections. Like I just spent so much wasted time on Instagram in college when I could have been finding like other Black women to connect with the entire time. Like it's all over Instagram, it's all over Twitter, it's even on TikTok, like it's out there. You just have to find it. And I think I spent so much time worried about who's wearing what on Instagram that I just like didn't even think about, finding other Black women engineers. But I mean, they exist, they do, and you just have to find them and connect, and put yourself out there and just introduce yourself. Like, it's not that sliding people's DMs is really not that weird.
As long as it's like not weird.
Yeah, you can't be like weird. You just be friendly.
And is there anything else that you want the viewers to know? You can also plug your Instagram right now if you want to.
Oh yeah. So well, I have my Instagram, but I also have a blog that talks about how to get into grad school, how to like make your application, and to work on different parts of your application, but also if you're already in graduate school, how to get through it, because this is a journey. But I think my one tidbit of advice, my one piece of advice actually would be to not limit yourself to only science. So I think a lot of people tend to focus on that one thing. At least when I was growing up, the narrative was always, if you're doing something you love, you'll never work a day in your life. I feel like that's a huge lie. Because I mean, even if you are doing something that you're passionate about, there will be at least one task that is tied to it that you will not like doing, whether that is paperwork or like, I don't know, any kind of housekeeping stuff. There's always gonna be something that you don't like to do and you're gonna get tired of it. So I would actually encourage people to find something else that you're interested in and not only limit yourself to just science. Like, do other things. You can be a scientist and a chef and a fashionista and a dancer, do other things, and you can prioritize your time however you see fit. But science isn't the only way. You can do other things and still be a scientist.
I like that. I'm definitely tapping into that myself because I do think that I've always wanted to, make a YouTube and have a podcast and talk about skincare and hair care and all that stuff. But I feel like during engineering, I kind of made the excuse like, oh, I don't have enough time to do it. So I'm definitely taking that advice, and I hope that anyone that's watching takes that advice as well. I am so happy that I got to talk to you.
I love this. This was great.
It's just so important because I just genuinely feel that representation is so important. Even if no one that watches this benefits from it, I benefited from it. And I know that when I eventually pursue my graduate degree, I have someone I can talk to about it. I have a blog that I can read, an Instagram to go to, and that means the world to me. So thank you for coming on and talking to me. I really appreciate it.
Yes, thanks for having me. This was fun. Let's talk about something else next time.
No, please. Again, I'm going to have multiple people come back on, so I would love to have you on again. And for those watching, thank you for watching, and tune in next week for another Being Black video. Bye.